This is the podcast of The Branch in Ashland, Virginia. Over the last few podcasts, we've been looking at the life of Moses. We looked at Moses as a baby when he was born and put into a basket in the Nile River. We looked at Moses after he'd grown up, how he had a strong sense of justice, but that strong sense of justice got the better of him, and he made a poor decision and ended up killing an Egyptian. And today we look at Moses as an adult still, but minding his own business when God appears to him and tells him that of all people, he's going to be the one to represent God, to go to Pharaoh and to ask that Pharaoh release his people, the Israelites. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely unqualified to do what you've been asked to do? What did you do in that circumstance? That's where Moses is. He feels completely unqualified to do the job that God's asked him to do. And so Moses pushes back on God, and God responds to each of Moses's pushbacks.
You know, it's pretty easy for me to make excuses for things, and I've seen this connection between my desire to actually do something and the excuses that I make. So if I really don't want to do something, like, it's simple for me to make an excuse about that. But if I want to kind of do something, but I'm feeling like, you know, maybe it's not the right time, it's not as easy for me to make excuses. I struggle in the seasons of the year with allergies and all kinds of things, so I can make good excuses to not go outside and, you know, get into the weeds literally. But, you know, I think some of us might find a similar experience, that depending on what it is that we have before us, it may be really easy for us to make excuses, or we may feel like, I don't need to make an excuse because what's lying there before me, I really want to do. I want to dig into this. And sometimes we make excuses because we want to disqualify ourselves. One of the things we talked about here at the branch last week was the fact that there are times in life that other people try to disqualify us. And there are some times that we try to disqualify ourselves. And it's not always making excuses. Sometimes it's legit. And we say, hey, you know what? Like, I don't think that I'm the right person to be doing this. So how do I make sure that the right person is here? Well, we're in luck if we've ever felt that way before. We're not alone, because there are others who have gone before us who have been in that place, and they've had to argue not with, you know, parents or teachers or bosses about that, but like with God about whether or not they were the right person in the right place at the right time. We've been looking through the book of Exodus, and we're going to be there today. We're going to look at a few different, it's a larger passage that I'm trying to break up into groups, so there's going to be a lot of it, but I assure you it'll be okay. I'll do my best to not be boring in my reading of it when I do it. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3, starting in verse 1. It'll be on the screen next to me. I'm reading from the New International Version. If you have a different version and you have an app, you can easily find a different one. Otherwise, if you're reading from a paper Bible and you've got a different version, the words may be a little bit different. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of fire within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it didn't burn up. And so Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush doesn't burn up. When the Lord saw that he'd gone over to look, God called him from within the bush. Moses, Moses. Now just picture that in your head a little bit, right? Like, you're minding your own business in the middle of the wilderness, and a bush starts burning, but it doesn't burn up, and then you hear your name from that bush. I'd be asking myself, what did I drink or eat this morning, right? And so Moses says, here I am. He's a better man than me, because I think I'd have run the other way. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. And he said, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I've indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I'm concerned about their suffering. And so I have come to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I'll be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you'll worship God on this mountain. Pause there in our reading. This is, if you grew up at all going to Sunday school or vacation Bible school or any of those things that the church does, then you've probably heard this story before. I'm dating myself big time because there was a thing called flannel graph when I was a kid, which, like, I don't even think it exists anymore, but these kind of like pictures that you put up on a board and they stick. And I can assure you that I probably heard about Moses in the burning bush through the flannel graph thing. Google it sometime. It'll be an amusing 5 minutes for you, I can assure you. Moses is told by God through a burning bush that doesn't really burn that, hey, I want you to be the guy to go and save your people. I've seen the oppression of the Israelites. I've seen that the Egyptians, they're enslaving my people, and so I want you to be the person to go. And Moses is like, I don't think so. Moses is feeling inadequate at this moment. And he asks, out of the heart of his inadequacy, he asks God who he is, that he should be the one to go. Have you been there before when someone says, hey, I need you to do this for me? And you're like, are you sure you're talking to the right person here? Because last time I checked my resume, it wasn't right for what you're asking me. But God says something so significant and so important to Moses, and I think each and every one of us need to remember what God says to him. When Moses asks God if he's really the one who should go, God says to Moses, I will be with you. Just that truth alone is something for us to consider. That if God is calling us to something, he's not going to say, hey, go off, do it, come back and give me a report. You know, usually any of us at work or at school or other things, if somebody asks us to do it, they entrust us to do it, and then we don't see them again until we've either finished or failed, right? But God's not saying, come back to me when you're done. He's saying, I'm going to be with you through this journey. You're not alone in what you're doing. I appreciate what the commentator J.A. Montyer says about this. He says, Moses said, Lord, I'm not adequate. And the Lord said, no, but I am. And Moses' eye of incapacity is balanced by the Lord's eye of ability. Like, that is the thing that, gives me chill bumps on my arms, because I think to myself, man, what a difference it is when I step into something and I'm like looking in the mirror and I'm saying, it's all you. Versus saying, looking up and God saying, no, it's all me. Like when I step into this, my inadequacy that I'm feeling at that moment, it's not something that I need to sit in. It's something that I need to get my eyes off myself and look up and say, no, I may be inadequate, but he's wickedly adequate to do the job before. Continuing on in verse 13, Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? What shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you're to say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt, and I've promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt, into the land of the Canaanites, Hivites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And the elders of Israel will listen to you, and you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, but I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. And so I'll stretch out my hand and I'll strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I'll perform among them, and after that he'll let you go. I'll make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. And Moses says, okay, if I don't feel like I'm the guy, you're saying I'm with you, but who am I? Like, I'm with you, yeah, well, that's great. But, like, who is I? Who are you, God? Who do I tell them has sent me? You know, for whatever strange reason, this is just an aside, which is totally a Johnism, but, you know, if anyone's ever seen the movie Pee-wee's Big Adventure, all week long I'm preparing this message, and I'm thinking about the fact that Moses is going and he's supposed to say, hey, I am sent me. And I'm thinking, Large Marge sent you, you know? Like, that's the thing that's played out in my head over and over again. So just to give you a picture into the warpness that is my head, okay? So, but Moses says, God, who do I say is sending me? And God says, I am. And you know, most of us are probably like, okay, if I'm reading through my Bible and I see that, I am sent you? I am who I am? What does that mean? Well, if we look over into the book of John, there are 7 times that Jesus makes statements, I am statements. And those I am statements that Jesus makes throughout the Gospel of John, they're connecting back to this passage. It's Jesus saying, hey, guess what? Remember the I am that met Moses and said, I'm going to save your people? Well, that same I am is who I am. This name for God, it refers to his eternality, that he is eternal. He wasn't created yesterday. Before time was, God is. And God doesn't say, tell them that God who created sent you. He doesn't set himself into the past by saying that. But nor does he say, the one who will return to judge the world sent you. He doesn't set himself into the future. He says, I am who I am. He's situating himself firmly in the here and the now. John, who wrote the Gospel of John, also wrote his Revelation in the book of Revelation. And in Revelation 1:8, we read the words of the Lord who said, I am the Alpha and the Omega, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. When Moses asked God, who's sending me? God says, the one who was, the one who is, and the one who is to come. I am. You know, there are times in life where we're not necessarily making excuses, but we're trying to convince ourselves. We're trying to psych ourselves up and say, hey, I'm supposed to go and do this, but I just don't feel like I can do it. We feel inadequate. We feel unable to do it. The thing about God saying, I am, is sending you, is that it makes a significant difference when we go in the name of somebody else. You know, before I became a pastor, I was an engineer, and you learn after being a 20-something-year-old engineer that when you walk onto job sites where there are contractors who are rough around the edges and don't care who you are, that you need to take a different approach towards how you step into that place. So one of the first things that I did anytime I stepped onto a job site was make sure my hard hat was on. Because when you're on a job site and you see a bunch of construction workers all dirty and messy, and then you see a snot-nosed kid walk on with a tie on and a hard hat, all of a sudden people are like, all right, there's something significant about that guy. And then I would learn that I needed to say, hey, I am the engineer on the job. And that when I said that, they may not have liked it, but they knew that there was an ounce of respect that needed to be given. That there was authority behind that. And what God was saying to Moses is not only am I with you, but by saying, hey, I am is with you, we're going with this authority. Like we're putting on our hard hat and we're stepping into a space. And we don't have to feel like, you know, are they going to believe me? Are they going to trust me? Because we've got authority to go in the name of the one who sent us. And I know there are moments in life that we step out and we feel like, I don't have authority. I don't have it, but God is saying, I am is with you. The God who was, who is, and who is to come is with you, and he has given you the authority to step into what he's called you to step into. Picking up in Exodus 4, Moses answered, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? I mean, Moses is like an expert at throwing these questions out to God. I think he's an analytical. If you look at his strength finders, that's probably what he is. He's just asking, well, why, what? And he asks God, what if they don't believe me? And they start questioning me. And the Lord says to him, what's that in your hand? He's been herding sheep, so he's got a staff. And God says, throw it on the ground. Moses throws it on the ground. It becomes a snake, and he runs from it. Finally, that point I was waiting for, Moses runs, but it's from the snake. And the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. Some of us might not even go that far to do that. Moses reached out, took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. And the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. Moses puts his hand into his cloak, and he took it out, and the skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. Now put it back in your cloak, he said. And Moses puts his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. The Lord said, if they don't believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they don't believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. When Moses brings up the fact that, hey, even if I tell them that you're with me, even if I tell them who you are, they still might not believe me. Now, I don't know if Moses was looking for a sign, but God says, hey, I'm going to give you 3 signs that you can go and you can say, hey, you don't believe me? Let me show you something. He's got the staff that turns into a snake. He puts his hand, I mean, this would be creepy because putting your hand into your shirt and pulling it out and seeing that you've got like a skin disease, right? And then the coup de grace of the whole thing is he takes water from the Nile River, which was the source of commerce and so much industry for Egypt, this important resource for them. He gets a cup of water and he pours it out and the water becomes blood. He said these are the 3 signs. He's giving Moses culturally relevant signs that he can show to the people to the leadership of Egypt. Things that will make them stand up and say, okay, like there's something here. Snakes were significant in the culture of Egypt. The Nile was significant in the culture of Egypt. And health is significant to any culture, right? Specifically skin disorders. And God has said, I'm giving you these 3 signs that you can use to let Pharaoh know that I am with you and I ain't playing, right? I mean, he's saying, I'm giving you this so that you see it. And I wonder, when God asks us to do something, God's asked all of us to, if we consider ourselves to be followers of Jesus, to be disciples of Jesus, he's asked us to go into the world and make more. It doesn't mean that we knock on the door and go through like this plan of salvation with people. It means that God's given each of us an opportunity in the places that he has us to be cultural and culturally significant. And so where has God uniquely placed you in the culture to make a difference? Where has God put you in the culture to make a significant impact and to be his representative? To speak with his authority, to speak with his power, and to be going in the name of him. Your job, your school, your neighborhood. And what abilities, what talents has God given you? How has God uniquely put you together in a specific place at this specific time to make an impact, not for yourself, but for him? And to be his representative in those places. Continue on in verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant. Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue. The Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I'll help you speak and will teach you what to say. And so Moses has come up with 4 excuses here, and he's not done. And Moses says, pardon your servant, Lord, please send someone else. Moses is my kind of guy, right? Because like he ain't playing either, right? He's like, I'm not going to beat around the bush, no pun intended anymore. But I'm just going to go right for it, and I'm going to say, okay, God, I gave you my best 4 questions. You came back with 4 great answers. Now I'm just going to say, I don't want to do it. I'm done. I'm not going to do it. And the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, what about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you. He'll be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I'll help both of you speak, and will teach you what to do. He'll speak to the people for you, and it'll be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it. I laugh at verse 14 because I wonder how many times, if a story was written about me, that when God asks me to do something and I come up with excuses, I say, no, find somebody else. The Lord's anger burned against you. But even though God's anger burned against Moses, he was patient with him and gracious with him. And I think that's what we need to take away from that. Like, God could have just said, you know what, I'm done. I'm going for somebody else. Like, I'm going, I mean, there is no plan B with God, but, you know, from our vantage point, that's what it would have looked like for God to have gone with plan B and say, no, I'm going to use somebody else. But Moses comes back, and he says, I just don't want to do it. And God's anger burned, but he still was gracious to Moses. He said, hey, your brother, Give words to him, and I'm going to be with both of you. And you can do it together. And I don't know about you, but in life, man, I'd much rather do so many things, especially uncomfortable things, together. Like, life is hard. Life is difficult. And there are certain moments in life when we feel like God's calling us into something, and we're like, really? Like, I don't feel adequate. I don't feel effective. I don't feel like I can do this. Can you at least send someone with me? Can someone go with me? Can I have a partner here in this? Because I don't feel like I can do it. You know, one of the things I've seen in my own life and my own upbringing is that there are times in life that God calls me to something, and I just kind of take it as marching orders. And I receive it, and I go out, I carry out what's expected of me, and I try to do it in my own standing. And I say, well, you know, I'm a fairly intelligent person. I've got degrees. I've got all these things. I'm going to rest on those things. You know, Moses was not in that place. Moses was in a place of humility where when God called him to do something, he wasn't saying like, oh, I got this. And I wonder how many times in our lives God calls us into something and we're like, oh yeah, I got this. That's not the way he wants us to be going into it, though. He wants us to be more like Moses. Hey, ask the questions. Hey, push back. Hey, question whether you're the right person for the job. And every single time, God is going to come back and say the same things to us that he said to Moses. Like, I got you. I got you, bro. I got you. I'm with you. And you've got my authority, and you've got my power, and you've got my strength. As followers of Jesus, we need to trust that God's promised to be with us, and the gift of the Holy Spirit that we receive through him is true. And that he's with us every step along the way. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're at a loss for words, but you knew that you needed them? Now, I've had moments, especially as a pastor, where I've been sitting in a situation and I've thought to myself, are you serious? Like, am I really the person who's supposed to be here? Sitting in a hospital room or a living room or something, and sitting with people who have received some of the most difficult news, and I'm like, have you looked at my resume? Like, I am not Mr. Compassionate. Why are you putting me here? And yet over and over and over again, I've seen the faithfulness of God who says, it's not you, John, it's me. I am with you. I will give you the words. I will give you the authority. I'll give you the power. And afterwards, I look back at the situation, and I'm like, yeah, he did. That wasn't me. That was somebody else. And that somebody else was the great I am. Was the one that Moses encountered in the burning bush. Moses resists God, and God gets angry and suggests his brother, and they go in that path. Aaron becomes a security blanket, and as we continue through Exodus, we'll see Aaron come up. And you know, the beauty of Aaron was that he was as flawed as Moses was, and we'll see that too. But you know what? God still used them. My mom had a sign on her refrigerator that said, God uses cracked pots, and I'm one of them. And I think we see that here. But it's so important for us to do what Moses did and to be so clear to God and say, you know what? Like, I don't feel adequate. I don't feel effective. I don't feel able. Can you help me here? Like, show me what I need. It's important for us to express those fears and concerns to God, to express our desires to him. They're not going to change his mind, but he may give us something more that we either didn't know we had or that feels new to us. And the Bible says we have not because we ask not. And I think there are moments when God calls us into something that instead of asking, we just say no. Are we going to do what Moses did and just give it back, even if his anger burns against us, knowing that he'll give us what we need? So what do we do with this? What excuses are you using to avoid doing what God's called you to do? Some of them might not be excuses at the heart. Some of them might be like legit us saying, I just don't feel adequate. I don't feel like I have what I need to go into this. And so write it out. What is it that you feel like you've been avoiding? And you've been saying, God, like I can't do that. And even write down the why. And then ask yourself, we talked a couple weeks ago about this idea of doing an inventory. Ask yourself, in what ways have you seen yourself as inadequate, as unable, as ineffective, and as incompetent? I challenge you, any of you who are on social media too, it'll blow people's mind if you think through in what ways you see yourself as inadequate, unable, ineffective, and incompetent. Put that up there, right? Because social media is full of everyone saying, I'm adequate, I'm able, I'm effective, I'm competent. Blow everyone's mind by saying, hey, guess what? Can I tell you how badly I flubbed it today? And some of you in this room, I've seen your posts, and I love that. I love the authenticity of that. Because it's through that authenticity that God works. Because we're being honest about it. So ask yourself, in what ways do I see myself as inadequate, unable, ineffective, and incompetent? And then ask yourself, in what unique places has God placed you to be his representative? Each and every one of us here, young, old, everything in between, God has placed each and every one of us in unique situations. And I said to the group that I was with yesterday, God, who created all things, could have chosen any way by which to make himself known to the world. He chose to become flesh and to live among us and to die as a sacrifice for us. And then when he was gone, he still could have done anything supernatural. And what did he do? He chose the church. And the church isn't a building. It's a bunch of messed up, broken, inadequate, unable, ineffective, incompetent people like you and me. And we're his representatives. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'd like much better representatives than I am at times. And yet God has chosen us to be his representatives. Flawed, broken, ineffective, yet exactly who he chose to be his representatives in the world. Let me pray for us. God, thank you. Thank you for the ways that you work through ineffective, incompetent, and broken people. And I pray, God, that we would look at Moses as a hero of sorts, not afraid to ask questions, but once those questions are answered, even if we don't always like those answers, willing to move forward because you're with us, the great I am. We pray this in your name. Amen.
If you think back over your life, have you felt inadequate before? Have you felt unable or ineffective? Have you felt incompetent? We heard today that Moses did, and he pushed back against God. I know that I can look back to plenty of times in my own life when I've felt inadequate or unable, ineffective or incompetent. And I think you'll find that most of us, if we're really honest, would admit to the same thing, that we've either been there before or maybe we're there now. And just as God was with Moses when he approached him and asked him to do something specific, so God is with you and me. And just as God gave Moses exactly what he needed to accomplish what he asked him to do, so God will do the same for us. Not only will he be with us, but he'll also give us everything that we need in order to accomplish what he's asking us to do. It might not be easy for us to trust, but I pray that God will give you the faith that you need to trust him at his word. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have any comments or questions, please email us at thebranchashland@gmail.com. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks again for listening.